Good evening, everybody. My name's Mark, and I'm an alcoholic.
This is the tape. This is the voice.
Testing. Can you hear all that all right? Can everybody hear that in the back? Raise your hand if you can hear me. In the back?
Probably going to have to come closer.
Test. Can you hear me now? There's a commercial that does that, isn't there? I apologize for being late, so I'll start out making amends. I told you I'll be here at 6 o'clock, but now I have to add something to this amend. It's not my fault. Some of you probably made amends like this, right? It's Greg and Diane's fault. They're from Nashville. I want to make sure this is on the tape. They've never been here, and we actually thought we could follow MapQuest and get here. Except we didn't know the difference between east and west. And then you've got four drunks in a car with four different ideas of where we should go. So at any rate, we got here about 6:15. First time I've been in Memphis. It's good to be here. I want to... I was separated from alcohol on October 19th of 1982 by a power that is within and without that I had been asleep to and certainly hadn't called on most of my life. And it is that power that has kept me separated from alcohol a little over 20 years. And I assure you, if you have any time sober, if your experience is like mine, there were many times I wanted to drink in those 20 years and a whole bunch of times when I should have. If God doesn't want you drinking, you're not drinking. I know that because I drank for 20 years. And God separated me from alcohol, and I have not been able to pick up a drink since. And that is not of my doing, and I'll talk more about that as the weekend goes. I want to read... Joe and I practice the disciplines of the 10th and 11th step, and the 11th step talks about be quick to see where religious people are right. So I'm going to be reading some things throughout the course of this weekend from different spiritual books that have had an influence on me and are currently having an influence on me. This is one of my favorites. It's a book of daily meditations called 365 Tao. And the meditation today is extremely appropriate. It's titled Actual. It says the actual is only actual in one place and at one time. When one listens to a barking dog, one might imagine emotion, pain, reaction, anxiety, and self-identification. But actually there's nothing there. Just sound from a long and deep corridor, channeled out of nothingness and fading into nothingness again. Like that dog, we may all strive, but there's truly nothing to be done. If we look deeply into our lives, there's only a thin veneer of self-generated meaning over an immense ocean of nothingness. What we do only has meaning in the here and now, the present moment. It will not remain in the next instant. Just do what you can for the present and leave everything else to happen naturally. Work, wash, meditate, eat, study, urinate, sleep, exercise, talk, listen, touch, die each night, be born again each morning. I tell you how slow I am sometimes. 20 years in Alcoholics Anonymous to understand that spiritual living is being present to the moment, with the focus being on being present to the moment instead of where you're at, who you're with, and what you're doing. That's what spirituality is to me based on my experience. I don't need to go to a church. I don't need to go to an ashram. I go to all those places. But wherever I am, that's where I'm going to meet God. I used to have this idea of all these things that you would have to do somehow, and something was more spiritual than the other till that simple phraseology of chop wood and carry water. The most spiritual thing I do is I take today, for example. I get up at 5. That's a practice, a discipline I've had for many years. I was raised on a farm in Iowa. You can take the Iowa farm boy out of the farm, or out of the out of the farming country, but it stays in, so I still get up with the chickens. I spent about 45 minutes in prayer. I meditate 2 times a day. It's a daily practice. Then I went and ran. Running is a meditation for me. Then I went and spent a little bit of time with a friend of mine, finished packing, got in the plane, got here, little fellowship this afternoon, and here I am. And that is by far the most spiritual thing I could have done all day, was to be present to all of those things. So 20 years to learn that. What an amazing deal. See, there's a power that keeps me from drinking and guides me and directs me and loves me and protects me. I'm only present to that power if I'm present to the moment. And most of my life I was not. And I'll talk more about that as we go through the weekend. One of the things I like to talk about with people, if you come to something like this, if you're like me, what you bring are memories of past experiences and attachments to your belief systems and opinions. And if you're also like me and you begin to hear things that challenge any of that, it produces what I like to call an inner resistance. And it normally starts with me shutting off my ears. And ultimately, it leads to me shutting off my heart. And I always like to talk about this very, very early when Joe and I get asked to do these, to ask that you go through the weekend the same way Joe and I do, and that's with an open mind and an open heart. That you not be attached to the memory of a past experience. Because I promise you that we're going to share some experience with you that's going to sound and look a little different than what you've done. It's not a judgment on what we've done or what you've done. We're just asking you to be open-minded. I want to read something else. One of the influences on me was a man named Anthony DeMello. This is a book called Awareness. And he says, "Nobody can describe the truth. Nobody. All I can do is give you a description of your falsehoods so that you can drop them. All I can do for you is challenge your beliefs and the belief systems that make you unhappy. All I can do for you is to help you unlearn. That's what learning is all about where spirituality is concerned. Unlearning almost everything that you have been taught, a willingness to unlearn and to listen." And that seems to me to be what a spiritual journey is all about. I will tell you what my intent is this weekend. My intent is to share with you my experience in the years I've been in AA, to talk to you about the current experience I'm having with the spiritual tools that were laid at my feet, and those are the steps. Our intent is to do this in a method in which we talk about the mechanics of the steps. For example, when I mean that, there is a way to work the first step. I didn't know that my first 3 years in AA, but there is a way to work the first step. We're going to talk about, in a general way, our mechanics, and then we're going to talk about our experience with those steps. And we're going to do that with all 12 steps, without devoting necessarily any inordinate amount of time to any one step over any other steps. We will talk to you about something that may be a new concept for some of you. It may not for others. When it comes to working the steps, if you have time in the program, there are two separate belief systems that are embraced. One is that I work steps 1 through 9 one time and live in steps 10 and 11. That's one belief system. There is another belief system, and that's the one that I currently live and work with. And that is that I continually rework 1 through 9. I do that now on an annual basis, starting at the very beginning, living within the spiritual disciplines of the 10th and 11th step. There's a line in the big book about I can use spiritual principles to solve all my problems. I've worked in the field of chemical dependency 12 years. I work on a ranch. We specialize in chronic relapsers. In over 3.5 years, we've had 250 of them come to that facility. These are people, they've been to treatment an average of 3 to 5 times in and out of AA. Some of them had sobriety as long as 18 years. And I always ask them to do what I call a relapse autopsy. I think that's a good word to describe where relapse could take a lot of us, because it's almost taken a lot of them there. And back to this concept of using spiritual principles or the first 9 steps to solve all my problems. Without exception, every person I've ever worked with through the relapse history has relapsed behind, quote, problems. Problems. And unbeknownst to me, for quite some time in Alcoholics Anonymous was I could take any problem I have. What are some examples in my life situation? Well, most drunks have problems with money. I doubt I'm the only one. I imagine everyone in this room does. Recently, not long ago, I was seeking some counsel from this person, and I used the term budget, and she'd been sober a long time, and she looks at me and she goes, "Did you use the word budget?" I said, "Yes." She said, "That's amazing." I said, "What?" She said, "An alcoholic on a budget." But there's a problem. You know, it could be physical health problems. I'm sure some of you, like me, have had problems in relationships. And the point that I'm really trying to make in all that is I work and rework the steps probably every year, the first 9 minimum one time. And the reason is because ultimately, if I get into enough pain and suffering behind all these other life situations, there's going to be a drink behind that. So that's the reason that I keep reworking the steps. That's why, for me, my experience shows me that doing 1 through 9 one time and trying to work with 10 and 11 did not accomplish what I needed to accomplish to end the pain and suffering that I continually was putting myself through. And I stress myself because all my troubles are my own making. I ascribe to that theory. One of the things I hated in the early years of AA was it really made me look only at myself. You know, we hate that. AA is about self-examination. And whereby we have an experience through the steps, we do internal work to bring about an external change. But that was new to me when I first came. I didn't like looking at myself. Why? Because what I saw wasn't very pretty. That's why. We were talking the other day, I was talking with a lady about forgiveness. What she was talking about was she had made some amends that, in her opinion, she couldn't even conceive of that person forgiving her. And I said, well, you know, my experience is with people who are not alcoholics, a lot of them, not all of them, forgiveness is done very easily. The reason it's very difficult for alcoholics to forgive is we're consumed with ourselves. Because typically what the alcoholic says, well, I just couldn't forgive if that situation was reversed. I understand that because being an alcoholic, everything is about us, isn't it? See? You know, we write resentments that are 30 years old. We were laughing. I was talking with Diane. She recently made some amends to some people, and it's sad to say, but they hadn't thought once about her since it happened many years ago. Of course, you know, it constantly keeps replaying in her mind. As a matter of fact, one of them couldn't even remember what it was she was making amends for. But you know, you see what I'm saying? We just are not. Our wiring is really messed up. I was talking the other day to some people, and I want you to understand this. I do what I do with the steps, this disciplined life I lead, not because I'm trying to be spiritual, and not because I'm trying to get somewhere, or not because I want to be a better person. I do it because I don't have any tools, drunk or sober, to handle life. I just don't. Now, maybe some of you do. Maybe you do well. I don't. I don't know how I did what I did today in the world, and you expect me to do it tomorrow. That's a pressure that I cannot endure. On any given day, going to the grocery store is an overwhelming deal for me. Now, I wasn't awake to this. I was real asleep my first 10 years in this program. Wound up in a psychiatric hospital. That did waken me a little. And I really started looking at this. And I experienced a truth within myself, the truth that I'm sharing with you now. I am ill-equipped to deal with this world and with life. It scares me. I am weak. And thank God for the disciplines of the 10th and 11th step. Thank God for the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God for the men and women that I have in my life. Those are the reasons why I do these things. No other reason. Call it self-preservation. Call it whatever you will. But that's why I do those things. A couple other things that I'm going to let Joe share here for a bit. One of the things, Joe is my oldest friend in sobriety. He's been sober a lot longer than me, like 60 days. I got dropped off at the treatment center he had gone through, and so we know each other real well. We have a lot of history together. And what he and I know is we're all the same in this room. There's a great book called The Spirituality of Imperfection, and it says that that's probably the very best that you and I are ever going to get to practice. And I believe that there's a lot of truth to that. When I say that we're just like you, I don't know if any of you have ever read any of the books about Mother Teresa, who has since been made a saint, but there was a very profound story in one of the books on her. She describes what happened the day she realized she had a Hitler within herself, and how that drove her to her knees, and the realization that all humans have a Hitler within them. What do I mean by that? I mean we're all the same. Thank God for these disciplines. Thank God for this program. Thank God for these steps, because when you're an alcoholic of my kind, without these kind of tools in your life, you are going to be locked up in an institution, in a penitentiary, or you're going to be dead. We were given another way. Thank God for that. The steps are holy and sacred to me. They saved my life. They allow me to live life it beyond my wildest dreams. I couldn't even begin to tell you. Capacity to love, friendships, work, career, every single area of my life. That's why I love to talk about them. I love to talk about my experience with them. One last thing too. We work off what we call spiritual consent. Those of you who've had the experience I had, and you go through these steps and you have this revolutionary change, you want to share it with the world. And if you're like me, you attempted to share it with a lot of people who weren't the least bit interested. So with Joe and I, we won't do that here this weekend. We're just here to share our experience. I'm glad there's such a good turnout here. So that having been said, let me turn this over to my good friend Joe. Yeah, we'll figure it out later. Actually, I bet that could come out you'd have to hold it.
Hi, I'm Joe. I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here. It's good to see some old friends. Gene, I've known for a long time. I have a new friend, Amy. Amy came to my home group. She was living in Los Angeles, and she came to my home group in Santa Monica. I think it was in October. And in my home group, we're allowed to ask questions. I know it's a radical idea, but we started noticing something I bet a lot of you have noticed, where you might walk into a meeting with a good friend, and you're just chatting and being honest on the way there and on the way home. But when you walk in the meeting, it's like something changes, and you're like, "Oh, hi, Mark." And there's this impersonal. So our group a long time ago, as part of the format, we're allowed to ask anyone anything in the meeting as part of the format, as long as you stick to the topic or whatever they're talking about. And Amy asked a question and asked me a question about surrender, and I obviously hadn't, and I said something about she couldn't possibly be an alcoholic because her voice is too cute. And I didn't know that she was going to end up back here in Memphis as part of this group that asked us to come here. That was nice. I'm glad to be here. I just celebrated my 51st natal birthday, day before yesterday, and it's also good to be with a good friend that I've known all this time, like Mark said, because it's also Monday will be the 1-year anniversary of losing my mother last June 9th. And I was with him at that time, working for him at Burning Tree Ranch. And I know that was part of the reason for that. I usually have a lot on my mind that I just kind of need to get out before we start, but I really don't. I had two days in San Francisco in the city, enjoying my birthday, and I have a dream that I'll tell you about later that's coming true that I've had for a long time that's happened in the last couple weeks, and rested today, but there's some things that are important to talk about before someone starts the work. And I think if we can look at this weekend, if you're here for information, so you can go back to your home group and sound like you're into the big book, that'll be a great thing. You'll get some great information, but you won't have much of an experience. If you say some sort of prayer in your own way, in your own words, to whatever you believe in, for an open mind, this could actually be an experience rather than just, it's something that we could talk about the whole evening, but we don't really have that much time, the difference between knowledge and experience, the difference between information and power. It's something that a lot of you know about, getting free of, being attached to. So I would encourage everyone in their own way throughout the weekend when you feel tension coming up, because we are going to raise some questions that have made us uncomfortable. Mark and I have gotten free most of the time of worshiping comfort. Comfort is very dangerous for an alcoholic. The book touches on it. But a lot of emphasis is put in this program about, he's uncomfortable. Don't make the newcomer uncomfortable, or don't say anything that'll make the old-timers uncomfortable. Well, you spend five or 10 years in Denver, Colorado with those people where Mark and I got sober, and you'll either get free of that or you'll go somewhere in the suburbs. And fortunately, we got free of a lot of that. I'm not intimidated by somebody with time, nor am I intimidated by somebody that's new, nor do I think there's anything I can say or anything that I could do that would drive them away or keep them here. And once you get free of those illusions that you can't keep people sober, you're not God, and you can't get people drunk, but all of those things are up to God, hey, it really frees you up, even with yourself, when you realize you're not responsible for your own sobriety. It's sometimes interesting to me that what a lot of people think is like the number one priority, which is to stay sober, and that becomes the number one priority in their life. I've certainly had those times. Their number one priority is really the only thing they can't do anything about. If you're powerless over alcohol, we're going under the basic assumption here that you're either alcoholic, addict, Al-Anon, something where you are powerless, and powerless means powerless. Not powerless with a choice. Those don't go together. You can't say, my name's Joe and I'm an alcoholic and I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable and I choose not to drink and this is how I manage my life. It just doesn't fit, unless you're insane. And I've been insane and I have believed those things. That powerlessness and choice are similar, that I can bring about my own surrender, that I can smash my ego. I'll get back to you tomorrow after I've surrendered and then do a fifth step with my sponsor and go home and work on my character defects. But powerless means powerless, and it's not just powerless over alcohol. We're going to see levels of powerlessness like an onion that go deeper and deeper and deeper, and we'll actually see how the first step follows you through the first 9 and well into 10, 11, and 12, and that there's many things along with alcohol and or drugs, whichever it is, to admitting that you're powerless and that your life is unmanageable. I'd like to read a prayer that actually Mark shared with us in Santa Monica, and we've had a small group of men for the last 6 or 7 months that come together to be accountable. Because we found after many years of sobriety, if you put yourself in a position or the people around you put you in a position, an imaginary position that can be very dangerous, and you become somebody who certainly can't be having any problems, that delusion runs deep. And this is a prayer we use each week when we meet, and it goes like this. That was God. We invite you into this room to guide and direct each of us as we seek your truth. Father, please set aside within each of us that which would block us off from the truth. Lay aside our prejudices about what we think we know about this process, this weekend, our spiritual condition. Remove our fears, Lord, that we may hear your truth through the members of this group. Give us the strength and courage to share your truth with each other in a real spirit of love and compassion for our fellow man. Amen. My sponsor doesn't... I got sober also in Denver in 1982. I'll be 21 August 17th, way before Mark's 21st birthday. And I still don't think he shows me enough respect for having more sobriety. And I was, geographically, I was 5 years in Denver, my first 5 years. I was 10 years in Santa Monica. I was 5 years in northern India. Neither one of those moves were made by me. And I think a lot of you can understand that, and I'll get to talk about that later. And I've been back now a year and a half. All of it was amazing. I am so grateful for the foundation I got in Denver, Colorado from those people, my sponsor, and a lot of other people with the work in this big book. You could not go anywhere better, in my opinion, and I've been all over the world, and it's not just because I got sober there. For some reason, there is a really strong tradition in some of the groups in Denver of working and reworking the 12 steps, mainly by two or three men. Paul Martin from Chicago, who's my great-grand sponsor. I think it's important, if your life is on the line and you're going to somebody and asking them for help, that you know a little bit about who you're asking and what you're getting into. Have they made up their own way of working the steps? Which leads into a good time to say this. Here's the first consideration. Is it possible that not working the steps that were given to us as outlined in our basic text is a violation of the 12th tradition because you're putting your personality or a sponsor's personality before the principles that were given to us? And there's people in this country that still respect those principles over their own personality. I'm sure that Don Pritz and Gary Brown and Paul Martin and Frank McKibben have come up with some nifty ideas that would have made taking somebody through the work a little niftier and had to let their own ideas go beyond their own personality or the personality of someone else, imposing another program within our program on someone, and that doing that and not adhering to the principles that were given to us that have worked over and over and over in our lives is a violation of the 12th tradition. And those people didn't do that, and I'm very grateful for that. So I think it's important to know, what if you go to someone and ask them to be your sponsor, and every single person they've ever worked with drank because they were only concerned with a 12-step call is good if I don't drink? Now, how selfish is that? Right? Nothing's going into the lives of anybody else, but I didn't drink. Right? That's like the guy at the top of the AA club gets up on the roof and shoots 12 people down on the street, and someone in the meeting hall goes, "But isn't it great he didn't drink?" Right? Killed 10 or 12 people, but he didn't drink. Right? So I don't know. I was 6 months sober in Denver, and I hit bottom was the second half of step 1. And I knew my life was on the line because I was screwed up further away from my last drink than I'd ever been. And that's baffling when you think drugs and alcohol were your problem. And now that the problem is out of the way, how come I'm so messed up? Well, alcohol and drugs aren't the problem. It's always been interesting to me that alcohol treated alcoholism for a long time. And if you can get this, if you're new, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't speak for AA. We're only here to share our experience in the last 20-so years. Of working these steps, of giving ourselves to this process. Every time I've started this work, a prayer has been very powerful. This last time I asked Mark to take me through the work because I was going to go to Texas. I had just gotten back from India, and I knew I was going to be in Texas for a while. I didn't know how long or how short, and I asked him to take me through the work, and it's been a powerful experience. But my ego will do this every time. The set-aside prayer is not going to work. There won't be much in 1, 2, and 3 that I'm not aware of. There won't be anything in the inventory that's not in my mind already, and there won't be very many amends. At every single time the prayer has opened me up, 1, 2, and 3 does its magic, reveals stuff in an inventory that I didn't know was there, and amends that I wasn't aware of, because doing the work again is to really catch the stuff that you missed doing 10, 11, and 12. You can be rigorous. You can be deeply committed to steps 10, 11, and 12 upon awakening, evening review, working with others, and stuff gets by. We miss stuff, and you see it. You see it. I was looking at a 2-year period, and I said a prayer in my own way to whatever I believe in. I don't even know what I believe in anymore as far as a name. I got free of the names a long time ago. It just names for God causes separation, war, and death. Which leads me into a comment that makes sense from my experience. A lot of religion is a block to any kind of religious experience. Not many people involved deeply in religion have had religious experiences. They've only had dogma and rigidity and concepts and word. Some people in religions get free to see the Spirit in the Word, to have an experience. But I don't know. I just don't have a name for it anymore, and I don't think that's important, especially in Alcoholics Anonymous. There is a term in here that still fits for me, and that's the creative intelligence of the universe, underlying the totality of everything, within you, within everything. And it also fits in with one of the second step propositions we'll touch on. God is either everything or is nothing. Then you join a religion and you spend the rest of your life telling people what it isn't. It's not in that one. It's not over there. It can't be in them. It's certainly not over there because it's just with us. And you've just defeated yourself if your purpose is to get more connected and discover the things in yourself which have been blocking you. So this set-aside prayer, I can't tell you how important it's been every time. My sponsor doesn't like that we've made it into something. It was an offhanded comment he made to me over 20 years ago when I told him my experience. He said, "My God, you know enough to be dangerous to yourself and everybody around you. You've been a therapist. You know about alcoholism. You know how you feel. You think you know what's wrong with you. My God, could you just say a prayer that what you think you know be put aside long enough for an open mind and a new experience?" And it worked. Another thing I wanted to read. This says, "Don't believe in anything simply because you've heard it here. Don't believe in traditions because they've been handed down by many generations. Don't believe in anything because it is spoken or rumored by many. Don't believe in anything just because it's found or written in our book. Don't believe in anything merely on the authority of your sponsor or the elders, but after observation, analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, and you've had an experience with it, then accept it and live up to it." Mark usually does this, but how many people in the room in their first year for the first time? First year, first time. Okay. How many are in the room for the first year more than their first time? How many are here between their second year and their fifth year? Over 5 to 10? 5 to 10? Over 10? Great. Over 15? Great. Over 20? Over 25? Over 30? So it'll be this little section right here in the front that'll be the most pissed off this weekend. Gene, right here in the front row, you're going to have to watch out, all right? They'll be throwing stuff. Anybody over 30 years? 32. Gene, how many?
31.
31?
Lady over there. 37?
37, okay. Keep an open mind for a new experience, to be taken past where we are, because God is everything. He's not finite. This isn't it. This isn't as far as you could be brought after 37 years. Is there more past here? Levels of peace, freedom, existence, work, more God? One of the saddest things I've heard from old-timers around this country, and they'll say it right to your face, and they'll be in a mess, there'll be something going on, they'll tell you about it if they're free enough, and they'll say, you'll make a suggestion, they'll say, I've worked the steps. What they're saying to you is, there's no more God for me. No more God for me. Steps are about seeking God and discovering the obstacles in your path. There's always more. That's what alcoholics love this, because more is our philosophy. A little bit, this is enough. Did you ever like anybody who ever said to you, that's enough? Right? Are you kind of, sort of, maybe a little kind of guy? No. We want more. So, these are questions designed to explore some current myths in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's good to look at these questions before the doctor's opinion and before taking the third step to see the change in thinking between steps 1 and 3, before starting inventory. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are a few. We like to see what we're dealing with here. Mark touched on this one. How many have suffered from how many believe that you work the first 9 steps once? Same general dangerous area, right here in the front. That's a delusion that almost killed one of our founders. One founder fell victim to it, one founder got free of it. Dr. Bob was influenced by a doctor who is amazing for any of you with time or new to read, Dr. Harry Tiebolt. It's sad we've lost his writings. In AA, you have to find them through Hazelton. But Harry Tiebolt wrote about a phenomena that the other doctors had not told us about. Every doctor that served us gave us a piece. They never gave us the whole picture because they weren't alcoholic. It was just opinions. Dr. Silkworth gave us the craving. It was an opinion, though. Remember, that's his opinion. Is it true or not for you? It wasn't true for him. Carl Jung gave us the spiritual malady and the mental obsession. Dr. Harry Tiebolt talked about the spiritual malady in an alcoholic after having a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. The dry drunk syndrome. How the ego has recuperative powers. After having a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, what does the ego do? I'm even going to challenge that. There are people in this room, myself included, for periods of time. There are people in this room that believe they've had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, where all they've had is a major awakening as the result of 1 through 9.5. They never finished 8. They never finished 9. They have not had an awakening as a result of the steps, and they'll tell you they've been through the work 2, 3, 4 times. They've never finished their first set of amends. They've had a major awakening, a life-altering experience as the result of 1 through 9.5 or 9 3/4, but they have not had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. Another consideration. How many believe that studying the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous will produce a spiritual experience? Good. Studying the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is a waste of time unless it gets you excited about doing what's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a set of instructions to have a spiritual awakening. It's not a book meant to be studied. You never got drunk studying a book about what it'd be like to walk across the street to the liquor store and buy a bottle. You had to get up, make a decision, take some action, buy a bottle, then you got some results. It's not meant to be studied. You never studied a liquor store. You just went to the liquor store, right? Here's another big one. Big delusion in Alcoholics Anonymous. How many in this room believe you'll always be recovering? Oh, good. First promise, first page, first forward to the first edition promised you that you could recover. But don't confuse that with cured. You can live in a recovered state. That doesn't mean you're cured. That means you're in a position of neutrality. You're experiencing the 10th and 11th step promises. You're on the other side of every amends you were aware of at the time, knowing that there'll be more in the future because we're alcoholic, but you're in a recovered state. They promised that. And they promised that when nobody had more than 5 years. Remember, page 1 through 164 has not been changed since 1939. Bill got sober in 35, am I correct? 34. By 39, he had 5 years. Nobody had more time in the program than he did. And they said that you could recover. How many believe where alcohol is concerned today they have a choice? You hear it all the time. Today I choose not to drink. Let me throw this out there so you can share it with other people. Isn't the idea that you have a choice the insanity described in our book about alcohol? Didn't all those people that drank again think they had some sort of choice? And how could you be powerless and have a choice? Do they go together? Power, control, choice. Look at the three words. They're no different. You lose one, you lose all three. How many believe that taking the third step is turning your will and your life over to the care of God? Good. It's just a decision, right? Just a decision. How many believe they can smash their ego? By this many questions, they're scared to raise their hands. There's somebody lurking in here that said recently in a meeting, I'm going to smash my ego, bring about my surrender, and work on my defects. If anybody wants to look at the rest of those, maybe I have a couple copies. There's a lot of questions based on the myths in Alcoholics Anonymous. Anybody believe that if the obsession returned, that thinking the drink through would keep them from drinking again? Okay.
Little story about people with time. I sponsor a woman who has 38 years sobriety. She's 76 years old. Wonderful woman in Dallas, Texas. And
Firecracker.
yeah, the way that came about was about 7 years ago. And with time, this happens. And you've got to take a course of action to prevent it. But she was in Dallas. They do a thing I actually really like. I've never seen it anywhere else but Dallas. But what happens is, like my home group, every month of the year, we invite another member from another group to come and share their experience the same night once a week for a month. So we get to hear some member from another group, 12 different groups. She had been doing that for years and sponsored 9,000 women in the pillar of her group and those kinds of things. And one of her proteges had a copy of one of my talks, and since she hadn't given her permission to listen to the tape, she confiscated it. And she had it at home, and in the midst of a suicide plan by her, she put the tape in. And I talked about being sober and dying of untreated alcoholism. And she heard it. And she broke down, and then she tracked me down and said, and I mean, I'm not used to somebody with a lot more time, let alone some kind of reputation AA, but I listened to her, and I saw she was very genuine. So I took her through the steps, and the difference in this woman was beyond belief, although I have to tell you, her ego was so defended that when it came time for the fifth step, I had another man who was studying to be a priest. Fortunately, also was a great drunk. And the two of us sat down with her, and it took us 8 hours. It took us 6 hours to crack her ego. She's never been the same since. She is so at peace with herself. Even at that time, there were all kinds of problems with family members, and that's all healed. And she sponsors 2 or 3 women and laughs at herself a lot more. And I sit down with her every 2 weeks, actually with her and another woman. We do a thing called Steel on Steel. She's such a role model to me, to be sober that many years and say, you know what, I'm willing to give it all up for a new experience, because mine isn't working too well. But she was trapped in that horrible place you can get trapped in when you have time, that Joe was talking about. We have set some things in place so that we don't get trapped there, because it's a trap. For example, I'll take myself. After this weekend, I'm not going to speak, I strongly suspect, for a minimum of 2 years, maybe longer. Why? Started getting asked to speak in 1994 on the plane down here. I was just recalling, I think Joe and I, this is our 16th or 17th one together all over the country. I have done things like this. I have done 42 of these since 1994. That's enough. That's enough. Spirit of rotation. Anything that my ego can attach to and claim some kind of identity is dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. So I have a group of Steel on Steel. I have a sponsor. It's kind of funny. He's 29 years sober. He comes to me for spiritual guidance. I go to him for common sense. Because the two in me do not exist in the same place. They just don't. He's been married to the same woman 30 years. I've been married and divorced 4 times. His thing makes sense to him, and mine made sense to me. But so I know how critical it is to have accountability. I think you can tell also. Joe and I we're very open-minded. We have our experiences, and out of those experiences, we saw what happened when you have a closed mind. Those types of things. So we're going to share with you some of the things that we do. I want to read another piece because it makes me think about my experience with the steps and with some of the influences I've had in my life, sponsors, if you will. It says, a question is often asked, why so much emphasis on confrontation? I hope you have a sponsor who works with confrontation, by the way. I have. It saved my life. It says the answer is because it's only through direct confrontation that the ego's concepts can be brought on screen or online. In other words, brought to the surface, questioned, and gone beyond. If a teacher or a sponsor plays somebody's game or lets someone get away with their unconscious self-deceptions because of a teacher's need or desire to be liked or popular, then the student, unfortunately, will get nowhere. Without direct, intense confrontation, students can and will only continue to act out their psychology. Why? Because that is all they can do. I had the kind of sponsorship, I was talking with Greg today, and it was direct and succinct and to the point, and Joe made, I think, a very valid point. Every one of us in this room is somehow connected to Bill and Bob, correct? Well, do you think anything could have got lost if you were 30 down versus 5 down? Yeah, I believe so. I think if you're going to ask someone to work with you, I think it's valid to ask them about their sponsorship lineage. Joe and I were blessed. There's 4 layers between me and Dr. Bob and the message out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, when I first hooked up with a man who had a message of depth and weight, who worked out of this book, there were some things that were made very apparent to me. One is I had absolutely nothing he wanted. 2, that this is what it was going to look like. 3, he was kind enough to take time and explain to me what willing to go to any lengths was about. Think about that for a minute. We do this all the time. We ask a new person, are you willing to go to any length? And they say yes, right? They're saying yes, but they don't know what it looks like, and we don't tell them. Right? He didn't do that. He asked me if I was willing to go to any length. I said yes. He said, well, let me tell you what that looks like. He said, what it means, Mark, is we're going to go from the title page to page 43 of the Big Book. We're going to look at the forewords, which are going to be general information. Then from the doctor's opinion to page 23, 33 pages of information, we're going to look at you and what happens to you when you take a drink. Is this you? He said, we're going to find out, are you a real alcoholic physically? Or are you just a hard drinker? Or a situational drinker? And he said, then pages 23 to 43, we're going to find out if you commit the most insane act of your life sober. And that is that if you experience what the Big Book calls a phenomenon of craving and you lose control, then the most insane thing that you'll ever do, you'll do sober, Mark, and that is you'll take a drink again, and is it possible you're not involved with that? And we're going to look at that. And we're going to look at a thing called the spirituality, the unmanageability of your life. And then we're going to look at the second step, from we agnostics up through the ABCs. And you're going to have to come up with some concept of a power greater than yourself, and you're going to have to make a choice that powers everything in your life. Everything or nothing. Then the third step, Mark, you're going to have to meet a requirement. You convince your life running your will cannot and will not work. And then you're going to make a decision to turn your will and life over to that power that you came up with the concept in the second step. And that decision is going to be about a 4-part relationship. Director, actor, principal, and employer. And then you're going to say a prayer, which is an affirmation of the decision. A lot of people think the third step prayer is the decision. It's not. It's an affirmation of a decision that I made earlier. And then if you're willing to follow through with that, there's no amen behind the third step prayer. We're going to get into inventory. And you're going to write a 4-column inventory, resentment inventory. You're going to make a list of people, institutions, and principles. And then we're going to write a fear inventory, Mark. And then we're going to write a sex inventory and take a look at your selfish, self-centered sexual behavior. And then when you're done writing all those inventories, you're going to read all of that neat stuff to me. And while we read it, I'm going to have a pad of paper and I'm going to begin to make a list of all these amends that you're going to go make people to these people. And then when we're done with that, you're going to go home, you're going to spend an hour in review. You're going to answer a whole bunch of questions. And when you're done answering those questions, then you're going to look at the 6th step, which is 1 paragraph long. You're going to answer 2 questions. You're not going to work on your character defects. You're not going to do anything else. You're going to ask God, are you willing to let him go? And then the 7th step, you're going to get down on your knees and say a prayer. That power that you came up with in the 2nd step take all you good and bad. And then there's going to be an amen. And then we're going to take a look at that 8-step list you got, plus probably going to add a few things to it. And then, Mark, you're going to go out and make amends to all. A-L-L. All. You're going to pay all the money back. A-L-L. All the money back. You're going to go sit across these people. You're going to find these people. I don't care if it takes you 30 years. Are you willing to do this? And then if you get that far along, then we're going to start working with the disciplines of the 10th and 11th step. From the time you walk out of your door in the morning till you come home at night, you're going to learn disciplines of the 10th step. And then you're going to have to start working with prayer and meditation 2 times a day. If you're going to follow the instructions out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then when you get done with that, God is going to put a whole bunch of people in your life to help. You won't have to go looking for them, trust me. They'll find you. And your life is going to be disrupted as a result of that. And you're going to be a busy man. Are you willing to do all that? Of course, my head's saying, wait a minute. There's nothing in there about a job, a woman, nothing. There's none of that, right? And he goes, are you willing to do all that? He always did something else. It was always a good thing. It's always nice to always remember the relationship you have with alcohol, because alcohol was my master for 20 years. So I'm faced with this question, am I willing to go to any length? But I'm faced with that and dying an alcoholic death. And that was what I call a no-brainer. Yeah, I am willing to go to any length. See, today, at 20 years, I'm still faced with that question. I'm going back through the steps right now. And hopefully, God willing, I'm just about through with my first step experience. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that. Like Joe, well, nothing new can happen, I'm sure, right? In the last 60 days, it is incredible to me what has happened. Because you start this process and this power takes you and the steps take you. You're just along for a ride, thinking you're somehow doing something with all of that. But always remembering as I begin the steps again this year, why I do it to improve conscious contact with God. Because the reason to work in the steps, the 4th step says, face and be rid of that which has me blocked from power. Joe talked about a phenomenon, you can't beat it, reconstruction of the ego, in which your mind takes a valid spiritual experience in which you've had deep and effective conscious contact. You develop great relationships with people, you're at peace with yourself, and slowly, gradually over time, your ego begins this reconstruction. And we all know what it looks and what it feels like. You start to get just a little bit judgmental of the people in your group. You don't call your sponsor quite so much. If you're in a relationship, the defects begin to take on neon lights and become more glaring day by day. You never really like this company anyhow, because they've never appreciated you. Your sponsees are not showing you anywhere near the respect and consideration to which you are due. And you know how it plays out. See, when those things are starting to go on, I like to call that reconstruction of the ego. That's called untreated alcoholism. That's called the spiritual malady. And you must understand, you and I cannot defeat our egos. Our ego takes the best of us. I don't care how long you're sober. It takes the very best of you. And it'll turn you into what I just talked about. Turn your life into misery. See, I don't have to take a drink to die of alcoholism. I just got an email the other day. There's a lot of old timers in the state of Texas, and this email was an old timer at 31 years, took a gun and committed suicide. See, if you suffer from untreated alcoholism, you don't have to take a drink to die from it. And that's why I once a year resubmit to the first 9 steps, because in all the years I've been sober, I have not been able to not have reconstruction of the ego manifest itself in some way. And that begins to lead to me being uncomfortable. Like Joe, got sober in Denver, Colorado, lived in Denver for about 9.5, 10 years, had some great exposure to some amazing people there. Then wound up in Texas in 1991, lived in Houston for a little while, Kerrville, Texas, and Austin, and then I've been in Dallas coming on 4 years. Really, in terms of making this a way of life, when I moved to Texas, to this little small town, Kerrville, that's when I really drew a line in the sand, for lack of a better word, and said, you know, I've given this my best shot at times, but I've never been as consistent with making this a way of life. You know what I mean? Day in, day out, consistent, like the big book tells us to do. And I've suffered some pangs and arrows, I think, because of that. And so the line I drew in the sand is, from this moment on, I'm going to be consistent with this until the day I die. And boy, I have been. And my God, what a rocket ride. Reworked the first 9 steps 4 times in 2 years. Incredible experiences. We'll talk about that. Made all my amends. I have no unfinished amends. There's nothing in my consciousness that hasn't been cleaned up from my past. Every dime was paid back. I was telling some friends, longest relationship I ever had outside alcohol was with the IRS because of amends. Lasted 14 years. Matter of fact, I was talking to a therapist, she's a friend of mine the other day, and she said, Mark, I understand this is funny that that's the longest intimate relationship you ever had, but it's also kind of sad. But those amends have all been made. It's all been cleaned up. It's all done. There's nothing behind me. Now, like Joe, you know, you go through the steps. As I'm starting through the steps, when I get to 9, there'll be a few. Last year, I don't recall the number. Probably somewhere between 8 and 12 amends. I fall asleep sometimes. Don't mean to hurt people, don't mean to create harm, but I do. But it's a lot different than the first time, where you had like 125 amends and 46 financial and family and all that kind of stuff. And unlike Dr. Bob and Bill, I lived in 7 states. Matter of fact, I get resentful when I read the stories of the early members, because they were born and raised in the same town. They made their amends in a day. You live in 7 states, you got some serious planning to do and a lot of trips, right? And I had to do that over many years. At 17 years sobriety, I found the last 2 people on my original list. Well, Joe and I are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what it's like to experience in your consciousness there's nothing behind you. There's no harm that you haven't cleared up. And what that does to you being able to be present to the moment. How that removes you from fear. How that makes you more effective in every single area of your life. How it allows you to be more truthful with yourself. To have more compassion. We're going to talk to you about what that's like. Good stuff. So, we've done a little bit with you all tonight. How I would do it. If someone said to me, Mark, would you sponsor me? That word's not in the book. We all know that. So that I follow the instructions in working with others. I would have had a meeting with him. Then I would have done with him exactly what I did with you tonight. which is I would have asked them if they were going to any length. They would have lied to me and said yes. So then I would have reviewed with them what that looked like, and then I would have sent them home for 3 days to think about it. And I can tell you my experience. Out of 10 people who ask me to do that, 2 call me back. They are never the 2 I want to call me back. They are never the 2 I want to call me back. They are normally, well, you sponsor what you are. They're normally arrogant, entitled, educated way past their intelligence, with massive defense systems. Any given minute, they could be very sociopathic and very self-delusional. That's normally what I get. That pretty well, Joe and I talked about that, but I think you have a tendency to attract what you were like when you started this. When I look at myself over the years, that's the kind of people that I've attracted. I don't. If you have sensitive feelings, I'm not your guy. You know, I'm unusual for an alcoholic. I have a full-time job, and I stay at it a lot, and so I get a lot of phone calls, and I'm busy, and so I have a few rules I follow. Like particularly if it's someone new I'm working with, I have a timer by my telephone, and you better have one too, because the maximum you're getting is 7 minutes. I do that for a lot of reasons, because when you're dealing with someone who hasn't done any work in the steps, all you're going to be dealing with is the chaos they've created with a life based on self-will. I'm not going to talk about that for very much. When I meet with them, I don't meet with them for much more than an hour, because they're so toxic that you get physically sick if you spend much more time than that with them. But then I tell you what we do. If they come back and say, yes, this is what I want to do, I like to have them get a notebook, and I like to have them write, on this day, I understand what willing to go to the links looks like, and I am prepared to do that. And I have them sign it and date it. I also do that for another reason. They'll call whining about something, and I'll say, do you remember on this day you agreed to, and they go, yes. Well, shut up and do the work. Click. See, that man named Big Frank taught Joe and I about keep the monkey on their back. You got one on yours already. See, I've done that. If you're sober for a while and sponsored people, you've done that, right? Taking on their sobriety, right? Taking on their sobriety. Oh, it'll kill you. You can't bear the weight. So that's kind of how I work with people in the approach. So